Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, unfortunately for the last time, I'm welcoming you all back at the very last debate of Prague European Summit 2021. We've reached the end together. Hope you will enjoy the last debate. As I said prior to the break, it will touch a topic that hasn't been touched that much by our guests in the past 2 days. It's the very important topic of trade and protectionism and trade wars that are filling the headlines of the news media. And it is my pleasure to welcome on the stage the moderator of the last but not least, the final panel of Prague European Summit 2021, the director of European Institute for European Policy, Mr. Vladimír Bartovic. Mr. Bartovic, the floor is yours and your guests. Looking forward to your final debate.
Thank you very much, Jan, for the introduction of me and also a brief introduction of the panel. My name is Vladimír Bartovic. I am director of the European Institute for European Policy, one of the two organizing institutions of the Prague European Summit. It is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speakers online and also here in the beautiful premises of the Czernin Palace on the last plenary session of the 7th Prague European Summit with a very important topic, rising protectionism and trade warring. What is there for the EU? It is a part of the EU in the world cluster of the program of the Prague European Summit. Let me also welcome you, our guests who are watching us on our online platform, and those who are still in the room and watching us from the side. At the beginning, please let me introduce briefly the speakers of this panel. It is great, fantastic, when I saw how the colleagues composed the panel, that we have the representatives of the three most important institutions, EU institutions here present, at the European Parliament, the Council of the European Union and the European Commission, and the panel is, another member of the panel is a very distinguished guest with a career in international institutions, including European Commission, Mr. Pascal Lamy. And I will start with a brief introduction of Mr. Pascal Lamy. He is currently the president of the Jacques Delors Institute, but also a member of our international program board of the Prague European Summit. Formerly, he served as a European Commissioner as well as a Director General of the WTO. He is holding many different functions, and in this moment, as I mentioned, one of the affiliations is Jacques Delors Institute. Another one is the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, but there are many more. Ms. Milena Hrdinková, State Secretary for European Affairs from the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic. I would say also a friend of mine. I'm very happy to be able to welcome you here, Milena. Milena has been actively involved in international and European affairs during her entire career. She represented the Czech Republic in EU institutions. She was actively involved in the preparation and conduct of the previous Czech presidency in the Council of the European Union, and she is the one responsible for the preparations of the upcoming one. Before, she was working also at the Ministry of Finance of the Czech Republic in many managing positions. Ms. Maria Martin-Prat, Deputy Director General of DG Trade from the European Commission, responsible for the trade policy in the European Commission, covering currently Asia, Africa, Caribbean and Pacific, also sustainable development and Green Deal services, digital trade, investment and intellectual property. But she also been, and she is Commission's chief negotiator for the negotiations with China on a bilateral trade agreement. And we have Mr. Jan Zahradil, Vice Chair of the European Parliamentary Committee on International Trade. Mr. Zahradil has been member of the European Parliament since the accession of the Czech Republic to the European Union. He also served as a president of the European Conservatives and Reformist Party. Before, he also served as a deputy at the Chamber of Deputies in the Parliament of the Czech Republic. So this is the brief introduction of speakers. We do not have too much time for the debate. It's only 1 hour. We need to cover so many topics, and we need to also give space for questions from the public online and also here in the room. Before starting, it is my duty to ask you to preferably pose your questions through the Slido program. You can also vote there and prioritize the questions. And we have a poll. It's our nice tradition. Every panel is accompanied with a poll. This time we are asking a question. Do you think we are entering a new era of escalating trade wars? You can vote yes or no, and at the end of this panel we will see what is the mood in the room and also among our online guests. I'm speaking already too much, but just to mention a few words about the importance of the trade and also about the risk of escalating trade relations in the world. We all know that especially last couple of years weren't favorable for the international trade and its further liberalization. The Czech Republic, it's known for many years, I would say even decades now, as one of the strongest, staunchest supporters of the international trade liberalization. We are very open economy. We believe that international trade without barriers is something that helped and is helping our economy to grow, and in the second stage then for our citizens to have better life. But last couple of years, since the crash of the negotiations on TTIP and then the presidency of Donald Trump, looks like started a new era in the international trade, where conclusion of huge international treaties eliminating not only tariffs but also other barriers to the trade is endangered. We entered a new era of protectionism. Now that leads me to my first question, that would be the same for all the panelists. And the question is the free trade still priority for all the global players? Also, what the pandemic meant for the free trade globally? Are there any lessons we can draw for the European Union from the last couple of years and from the pandemic as well? I would like to ask first to speak Madame Martin-Prat.
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me well. And let me start by thanking you for inviting me to participate in your Prague European Summit. It's one of those events that one wish did not happen, at least as far as I am concerned, online, but I'm nevertheless glad to be part of the discussion. Now, as to your question, what did the pandemic mean and where are we today? I think it's fair to say that in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, we had probably every reason to be pessimistic. We had, at the beginning, a shortage of some essential goods, and there were tensions created by a rise of protectionist measures around the world. And the EU was not fully immune to these. When we recall some of the export authorization schemes, for instance, for personal protective equipment that were put in place. However, whereas we were facing there a problematic scenario and a risk of an extension of these measures to cover, for instance, other goods such as agricultural products, we saw that worst case scenario did not materialize. After a few, and I think normal, very difficult weeks, the international community, and the EU as part of it, agreed, I think, quite clearly about the need to keep open trade with a view to handle and try to get out of what it was otherwise a major international crisis. And I think the wars did not materialize, that's very clear, and we averted a rise of protectionist measures. And the proof of that is that when you look at the increase in trading goods in 2021, which has gone up by 88%, it is very clear that the crisis has not led to a closing of trade. And we have a similar scenario that continues to be discussed as regards vaccines. There's been tension. They are not completely out. When we talk about access to raw materials, access to vaccines. But I think it's fair to say there is a growing acknowledgement that the rules-based global trading system can contribute and should contribute, we need it to contribute to the expansion of production, to the reach of what is yet something we have to double our efforts towards, reach equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. So in the short term, to your question, the answer is we can be optimistic. The longer term is where I think our assessment is a bit more complicated. Over the last years, what we have seen in general, so leaving aside the COVID-19 crisis, is a situation where a rules-based trading system has been challenged from a number of angles. I don't think I exaggerate or say anything new if I say that we are facing probably the deepest crisis in our rules-based trading system since basically it was established after the Second World War. We have seen a rise in economic nationalism and unilateralism, and we also see increasingly the use of trade policy for geopolitical goals. It's increasingly difficult to separate trade policy from foreign policy, and this can be dangerous for trade policy. So what can the European Union do? We have been very actively getting involved and having a reflection internally and with our trading partners in this respect. Our starting point is very clear. We need to continue to base our policies on openness. Openness on trade is essential for Europe. It's been, and we think it will continue to be, one of the key elements in our growth, our prosperity, and our competitiveness. Now, I think that at the same time that we reaffirm that very basic principle, what we also have is an increasing understanding that openness needs to be paired with fairness and reciprocity in the right meaning of the word reciprocity. We did earlier this year publish a new trade strategy of the European Union, a communication that you may, I hope, have read, Trade Policy Review, under the title of An Open, Sustainable and Assertive Trade Policy. And probably this reflects very well how we see our trade policy going forward. We are aiming at a model of what we call open strategic autonomy, which has been much discussed. Basically, what we're trying to say is we want to be able to benefit and make others benefit from the opportunities that international trade brings. At the same time, because we see that on a number of issues this is needed, we have to protect the European economy, our internal market as well, from unfair trade practices. Now, we will always have our first preference in addressing problems on the basis of rules and multilateral rules, bilateral rules when possible. The WTO being key for this, and also our network of free trade agreements. At the same time, we have also understood the need to use the tools we have and develop new tools when this is required to ensure a level playing field. We've been for years using our trade defense instruments. We are now looking into putting in place other instruments, for instance, to address distortive effects of subsidies granted by third countries to players that them have an effect and distort competition within the European internal market. So that is a balance that we will be trying to keep going forward as we deploy these and other instruments, but that again is and continues to be grounded on the idea that free trade is for the benefit of the European economy and more largely the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Prat, for your introductory remarks. That was mildly optimistic. We survived the biggest crisis in the last 100 years, affecting also the international trade. But now many problems are still ahead of us. Let me just say that I hope that your words will be listened also in other parts of the world. And we will find partners for the efforts to further protect the freedom of the international trade. Mr. Lamy, now the floor is yours with the same opening question. So, what the pandemic meant for the free trade globally, and what are the lessons learned for the European Union?
Well, I will not repeat what Maria Martin-Prat said, because I agree with her on the first part of your question. The COVID crisis has not been a turning point in trade. After an initial period at the beginning of the pandemic, when most countries had to lock down, there were some trade restrictions, especially in the medical sector and sometimes in the food sector, but tensions have eased rather rapidly, so that we are now sort of back to normal, yet not out of the woods. Short term, we need trade to remain open for the recovery to spread throughout the international economy. And for this recovery to spread throughout the global economy, we need to address this vaccine apartheid issue, which we now are facing, with a huge imbalance in the rate and the speed of the vaccination between rich countries and poor countries. So the priority from a sanitary point of view, from a moral point of view, and this can be discussed, but for the economic point of view, the priority is to accelerate the vaccination so that the economic recovery is quicker rather than longer. And whether the economic recovery will last 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years can make a huge difference, including for European populations. So that's the urgency. And we know that within the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, and the WHO, there is now a sort of war room which is taking shape in order to accelerate both the production and the distribution of vaccines, and there is a contribution of the trade system to that. Longer term, I believe that the world trade system needs to adjust to the changing nature obstacles to trade, which are now less about protecting domestic producers from foreign competition than about protecting population from risks. And this entails a new WTO agenda, but we will come back to that.
Yeah, certainly we will. WTO will be on our agenda. I will have certainly also follow-up questions for you in that respect. But let me thank you for pointing out the importance of the vaccination, and also to pointing out to one of the biggest issues to free trade, which were the global distribution of vaccines, and not only of vaccine, but also of protection or protecting equipment. Now I would like to turn my attention to Madam Hrdinková, because already when Mr. Lamy was pointing out to the vaccines and to the protecting equipment, maybe I had a feeling that in the moment of crisis, our devotion, I mean the Czech devotion to the free trade, had some also problematic points. At the beginning of the crisis with the chaos, we also decided to impose some protective measures, but probably, and you will confirm that I believe that was something rather exceptional and not showing the overall change in the Czech attitudes towards the free trade. So, Madam Hrdinková, the place is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me say that I cannot but agree with the previous two speakers that free trade problems and imperfections did not show up or do not exist because of pandemic. But it's clear, as in any or many other areas, that if there are imperfections in quiet times, when the crisis comes, it usually doesn't improve, it gets worse, and it may need more energy afterwards to repair all these things. You mentioned, Vlado, in the beginning, or part of the question was, will the principle of free trade remain the key principle for global economies after pandemics? I would slightly oppose that because I think that the free trade as a key general principle is a leading principle for the EU, and it's correct because it's the very basic thing without which internal market cannot really exist very well. There are some other global economies where I am not completely sure about this statement, and if it was not true before pandemics, now it may take some time to get closer to this ideal trade world. The Commission publishes every year the report on tariff and non-tariff barriers, and already in 2019, I think we saw more than 400 tariff and non-tariff barriers in 58 economies, which in my mind is a lot. And when we talk about trade war, we predominantly talk about tariff barriers, but I mean, we should stress out that those non-tariff barriers are plentiful and really making business and international trade difficult. With the crisis, with the pandemics, we saw, as Mr. Lamy correctly pointed out, the problems emerging particularly in some areas, and we also saw big differences in different global economies, like where the European Union decided to introduce measures for more transparency. In the United States, we saw quite strict restrictive regimes that actually disallowed some producers to continue in proper production of vaccines for the whole world, where let me mention that in the EU, somewhere in March and April, where everyone was lacking vaccines, the EU was producing and exporting around the same amount. It was somewhere around 80 million doses outside of the EU, as they were delivering based on the contracts in the EU. So my point really is that the EU market and trade as such is predominantly more open, which is in my mind correct. And you mentioned the position of the Czech Republic. It's a constant part of the Czech policy, because the Czech Republic, as smaller, not small, but smaller, open economy, where all our businesses create part of large business chains. We cannot simply do anything else. And I strongly believe that we haven't changed anything on that. If there were some protective measures during the pandemics, we should realize that we were protecting something else but trade, and those are not like key protective measures, and I think that we all have quite good chance to get back to normal within some time.
Thank you, Milena. And thanks a lot also to pointing out to one important factor, and it is maybe the gap between the public claims of certain countries or even politicians, and then what's happening on the ground, and there can be a huge difference in that. Mr. Zahradil, the same question for you, but just stressing again that you are probably, or I have fixed you in my mind as one of the staunchest supporters of free trade globally. Maybe you can bring us a little bit also closer. What are the attitudes in the European Parliament? Because we know that something might be proposed and promoted by the Commission, but then there is also the European Parliament, and that's not so easy. So if you can tell us also about that aspect.
Thank you very much. In that case, I have to make a little warning at the beginning, and this is that not everything what I'm going to say will be, let's say, compliant with the European Parliament mainstream. Maybe some things I'm going to say will be rather minority or dissent opinions within the European Parliament. I can agree with all previous speakers that facing problems in the area of international trade, those problems were not triggered by the pandemic. Some of them were deepened by pandemic, but some of them have been here even before this unhappy situation started, and the pandemic made them only more visible. I have been serving, as you have mentioned, in the European Parliament for a very, very long time, maybe for too long. I remember that under Commission President Barroso, it was still more or less about trade. Under Juncker, it was still more or less about trade. Now I see that the trade agenda, and most particularly in the European Parliament, is being gradually hijacked by other non-trade agendas. I'm referring to the European Parliament, not to the Commission, not to the Council. I think that the Commission is still quite pragmatic and rational, Council as well. But I can see in the European Parliament some, I would say, ideological approaches, more ideological approaches, that in my feeling could add some other problems to what we are already facing, and this is the cluster of both tariff and non-tariff barriers. Now we have also other things that somehow penetrate the trade agenda and that are even able to tie EU hands in negotiations. I give you a story. Last April, we had a meeting in the European Parliament with new Australian Trade Minister, Mr. Tihan, who visited Brussels in the previous attempt to seal the EU-Australia trade agreement, initially, by the way, planned for political conclusion by the end of 2020. And of course, he was questioned by several of my colleagues on what they call insufficient guarantees concerning the trade and sustainable chapter on the Australian side. And he replied, I quote, "A core Australian belief that may be a little bit old-fashioned is that free trade agreements should be about trade liberalization and freeing up investments flows and freeing up services flows. Other things are important. These new issues which are making their way into free trade agreements, but what they shouldn't do is to get in the way of the core rationale for free trade agreements." What I'm referring to is that the EU is starting to introduce new conditionalities when negotiating trade agreements with our partners. These are most often linked to the Green Deal, to the social conditions, or human rights, or good governance, however you can call that. And I firmly believe, and many of my colleagues in the European Parliament would strongly disagree with me in this point, but I firmly believe that we should not and we cannot overload the boat with our demands and requirements from those non-trade areas. Otherwise, nobody else will pursue deals with us anymore. And if you look at our last free trade agreement that was concluded, it was the one with Vietnam from February 2020. We have a few others in the pipeline, but some of them even now are meeting a very strong opposition in the European Parliament. Mercosur deal is in trouble. Mexico deal probably as well. Australia, New Zealand, I have been referring to. China investment deal is now in freezer. We will probably come to this a little later. So I would say that we should take also this into account, because if you overplay this non-trade part of trade agenda, definitely there is some non-trade part of trade agenda, but if we overplay that, we will just kick ourselves off the global scene, and we will make our position much more difficult when negotiating or pursuing negotiations with other partners on the world stage. So this is just one other remark or other point of view I felt should be mentioned as well, because very few people talk about it this way. Definitely it's not very fashionable in the European Parliament, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Zahradil. Exactly, you brought up a very important question. The question whether the EU, in its intent to be a global leader, for example, on climate-related issues, whether it should use also the trade policy in order to pursue, for example, its stances on climate, or human rights and other agenda. Maybe we will get to it later, but when I am looking into the Slido system, I can see plenty of questions, and a big part of them is asking about WTO. Just first of them from Artur Gopak: is WTO dead? Very, very straightforward question. Another one from Charlotte Bufano: could revitalizing the WTO through a reform of its modus operandi resolve the trade tensions, and could an EU leadership boost such a process? Another one, if WTO is not longer relevant, what new mechanisms and incentives could be introduced to prevent tariffs and barriers for being introduced? So, Mr. Lamy, I think you are the best suited to answer these questions.
very much. Well, let's go back to basics and reasonably simple things. The mission of WTO is to reduce obstacles to trade. If you look at what the WTO has done in the last decades, overall, it has done well. Trade is more open than it was in the past. More countries, more businesses are participating in international trade. So overall, the job has been done so far, even if there has been or there are still trade tensions here and there, including during the Trump absurdity parenthesis. But obstacles to trade are changing, and geopolitics are changing, which necessitate the WTO to adjust, to reform, to change. It must, on the one side, update its rule book, and on the other side, it must improve, as was just said in a question, its own modus operandi. On the rule book side, I will disagree with Mr. Bartovich, unsurprisingly, because I think he makes a confusion between protection and precaution. Protection is when you protect your domestic producers from foreign competition. Tariff, quantitative restrictions, subsidies, classical obstacles to trade, which need to be reduced and which have been reduced. Precaution is a different thing. It's when you protect your people from risks in the area of the environment, health, safety, food, and so on. And this is a legitimate duty for government to protect their population from risk. Now, doing this implies a level of precaution which is rising and which translates into regulations which, understandably, are imposed on domestic producers, but also have to be imposed on imports for reasons of fairness of competition. And this is where we get these new issues. And in my view, we have to adjust the WTO rule book so that we keep some attention on protectionism, but we shift attention to precaution and precautionism. And this entails in the area of environment, in the area of digital trade, in the area of health, in the area of food, changes which needs to take place. Now, the second area where the WTO has to reform is precisely its modus operandi. We now are in a situation where many countries are now members. We know that on a lot of issues, US and China are at odds everywhere, including in the WTO. So we need a better governance of the WTO itself. And in order to do that, and I know that for having been there for 8 years of my life, you need to reform the governance of WTO with a better balance between the power of the member states and the power of the Secretariat and the DG. For the moment, there is too much power in the hands of member states who have a hard time agreeing on everything, and not enough capacity for the Secretariat to table proposals or to table compromises or to move the negotiations forward. So this is something that also needs to be done. And of course, given this new geopolitical situation, and notably this polarization between US and China, the European Union must up its game in the WTO, table proposals to move forward, tables proposal of reform, and then facilitate some sort of US-China convergence. So a lot of what needs to be done resides in this triangle between US, China, and the EU. It being understood, and we all know that that trade is the only real area where EU as a bloc has a big authority and influence, and it must use it to move the WTO forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lamy, for there is also applause in the room. Thank you for that, for proposing concrete steps the EU could bring forward in order to reform the functioning of the WTO, so it can withstand the current tensions in the international trade. You also mentioned already China. We will certainly come back to it, though we have only 20 minutes left for the panel, and I can see around 15 questions just on Slido. I have prepared another questions. So we need to be a little bit faster and brief in our answers. I would like to ask panelists to try to address then the questions maybe in a very concise manner. I would come back to Mrs. Martin-Prat because it's also today is a great day. I believe today the European Commission is presenting the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I would like to ask you whether you believe that it is an instrument which will be welcomed by other global players, whether you believe it's in line with the WTO regulations. And we have also a question from the public asking whether you believe that CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is a milestone to make trade policy more sustainable.
Okay, I can very briefly react to that. And you're right, we saw today the adoption of a whole package of measures and proposals from the European Commission in the area of climate. And CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Measure, is part. Now, the objective of CBAM is very clear, is an environmental objective. There's been a lot of discussion as to whether we're talking about an environmental tool or a tool aiming at raising the resources of the Union. It's an environmental measure. I think is part of our efforts to move towards a clean production to meet our goals in terms of the Paris Agreement and to ensure that those objectives and efforts we made are not undermined because of the trade we have with our countries. We have made and will continue to make big efforts in terms of discussing this measure with other partners. And in that respect, obviously, we have been careful, extremely careful in the preparation to make sure that from our point of view, what is put on the table is in line with our WTO obligations. And as I said, this is something where we will also be careful in the course of negotiation and deployment of the mechanism.
Thank you very much for that very straightforward and clear answer to these questions. Milena, I mentioned already that the presidency in the Council of the European Union is approaching. In 2009, liberalization of trade was one of the key priorities. Even it was reflected in the slogan of the Czech presidency. I don't remember it correctly, but you will maybe mention it. Is the free trade or liberalization of the trade again going to be one of the key pillars of the program of the Czech presidency?
I hope it will. I mean, we all know that the political situation in the Czech Republic is so that we will have a new political representation, and for me and for my team, I will certainly recommend to the new political representation to take up this priority. It's certainly amongst one of our priority circles right now, which we call prosperous, modern, and interconnected EU, and also EU as a strong global player. But here, I think we need to be a little bit more specific, because here we talk more a global trade between the EU and other partners, but the direction that you are pointing at is more functioning of the internal market, and in fact trade amongst member states, which is also very, very important, and it's probably even higher prioritized from the Czech Republic positions in longer term time, but certainly a strong EU as a strong global player and improvement of the situation, at least with some partners with the same perception of key principles, and here I would refer specifically to USA. I think is at our own benefit to promote them.
Thank you. Do you expect that already during the Czech presidency there could be negotiations opened or reopened with US on possible trade agreement?
I would love to see that. The current state doesn't give a lot of optimism, but I strongly believe that the key EU players will work hard on that. And well, I have to say that the state of how the trade relations between EU and US looks like right now, in my view, is not satisfactory. I think that the new US administration gives a lot of hope and optimism, but on the other hand, we should not be over-optimistic, and we will need to work hard on that. And I mean in the EU, and here I think we should look a little bit what Mr. Zahradil said. We fully assign to all the EU ambitions and goals. You know, there are good reasons for that, but either we want very good, realistic and within reasonable time trade relations with other countries, or we insist for any price on our higher goals. This is as I see it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Zahradil, we already mentioned the United States, we mentioned China. China changed, or the European Union changed recently the label of China. When it's talking about China, it was partner, now it's systemic rival. Also, we see that while the change of the US administration meant a change of tone, for example, in relations with Europe, it didn't mean the change of tone in relations with China. My question is, do you think that the European Union should follow the US lead on pushing China in the area of trade and asking the China to be in the same way fair and open up its market like the Western economies are doing towards China? Or should it pursue its own policy, including, for example, the conclusion or the investment treaty, or trying to get the investment treaty into force, and maybe in the future open up also negotiations on trade deal? So what's your take on that?
However unlikely it might be seen at the moment, I believe that EU not only should, but sooner or later it will pursue its own policy vis-à-vis China. Because if we talk about strategic autonomy, what else is, or what more important issue is on the table than to develop and to define our own strategy vis-à-vis the second largest global economy. Of course, China is a non-democratic country according to European standards. It will remain so for a very long time. I think that the Chinese regime, there are no signs that the Chinese regime is going to change in a very short or foreseeable future, if ever. So I think that basically we have two ways where to go and how to go. One is the way of confrontation. The other one is the way of some modus vivendi. I can fully understand and I can buy US approach. US feels to be threatened by China, challenged by China. US think that China is the biggest threat for its global dominance. So that, let's say, harder or confrontational approach is understandable. However, I don't think that EU should automatically copy-paste that or pursue that. In this moment, relations with China are more or less frozen, of course. There were EU sanctions vis-à-vis China or some Chinese officials that were reciprocated by China. So this investment deal is now, as I said before, in the freezer. This will not last forever. This will change sooner or later after some, time of tacticking and politicking. There is also a lot of, I would even call a paranoia played over China, also some intelligence games being played from both sides. But I don't think that this will last forever, and sooner or later there will be some, let's say, normalization, and some kind of modus vivendi will have to be found. The question is how much time it takes.
Thanks for that. That's very optimistic, I would say. I now, since we have only less than 10 minutes left, I would like to recall that there is still the option to vote in our poll. The question is, do you think we are entering a new era of escalating trade wars? It's very interesting that so far 58% of guess they think that yes, and while 42% thinks that no. So it's quite equal. There is no certain or strong majority for none of the opinions. Okay, let me go back to Mr. Lamy, because it seems that the issue opened by Mr. Zahradil, the question whether the trade deals should have also other aspects, it's also important for our guests, because the question, it's more half question, half comment, which got most votes and it got prioritized by our guest, reads: trade is a key way for us to push others to respect human rights and the environment. If trade doesn't address these issues, how can the EU project its values? I also wanted to ask about your opinion, whether you think that other aspects such as climate should be included in the EU trade deals.
Yes, that's my answer. And this is where I disagree with Mr. Zahradil, although I must say I very much agree with what he just said about where the EU should be in between US and China, which is our own course, although of course not equidistant from US and China for a number of reasons. Now, to go back to your question, the reason why we need these new issues in trade regulation, in trade agreement, whether they are multilateral, regional, bilateral, is simply that if we do not have them, this will result in large discrepancies between regulatory systems, the purpose of which is to exercise freedom. and which is done differently in different countries. And these discrepancies are obstacles to trade. So we should not, and I repeat, focus too much on the old obstacle to trade, the purpose of which is to protect your economy from foreign competition. These are now relatively small, at least in the goods area, although there remain too many obstacles in the services area. So we have to keep a priority on classical trade opening in services. But the issue now is to factor in environment, health, data protection, data accessibility, data localization. And this is very important for us. We in the European Union exercise the highest level of precaution worldwide. If we do not enter into more understanding, more leveling the playing field in exercising precaution with other countries, then either we will become holders of new trade obstacles, or we will lose trade competitiveness. So that's the reason why these issues, these new issues, needs to be part of the trade agenda, and especially for us Europeans. On top of that, there are other areas where a standard notion of precaution may make sense, which is, for instance, human rights, because I think it's not tolerable for the European Union to import massively goods or services from places where human rights or labor rights are either negated or not observed. So this means that the EU agenda has to step more into this sort of precaution for the future in order for the EU to remain open trade in the future as it has been in the past. And on this, I totally agree with this notion that the DNA of the European Union is open trade. It simply happens that obstacles to trade are changing, and in order to keep trade open, we need to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Lamy, for a very clear opinion, and we have also disagreement here, which I really like. They are a good start for the debate, though we have only 3 minutes left. I will just very quickly ask Milena, what is your position on that, or the Czech position on that? Should there be these aspects included in the trade deals or not?
Well, let me speak more on a personal level on this, as we are getting to more academic and philosophical, I think, level of the debate. I really think that we need to start thinking a little bit more, where is the border between values that we absolutely want to base our union on, and we absolutely want to live according to them within the union, and then where are the values and principles that we insist to pursue outside of the EU, and whether really this is something what creates the level playing field and fair conditions as Mr. Lamy describes. I think that right now in the Commission and European Parliament, sometimes what I see in the discussions, we are going a little bit beyond that in the debate on what trade should be linked to it. But in general, yes, we can do it, but it's the level of price. Everything is at price, and I mean, it really is the question, what price are we ready to pay, even in terms of time spent on negotiation to get an ideal FTA, for example.
Thank you, Milena. Now the last minute is approaching, and I know from the organizers that we have to be sharp. So I have the one last question for all of you, and you answer only yes or no, nothing in between, and that will be your concluding remarks. So do you think we are entering a new era of escalating trade wars, Mr. Lamy?
No.
No? Madam Prat?
Hopefully, no.
Milena?
No.
Mr. Zahradil?
No?
No, that was very different. It confirmed actually the very optimistic start of this debate. Our distinguished guests, they had a majority of them, 59% are more pessimistic. They think that yes, we are entering the new era of escalating trade wars. 41% of people, they have the same opinion as you. 10 seconds. Thank you very much. It was great. I learned a lot. I'm happy that there were things where we found common ground, and there were also things where we disagreed. Sharp. Thanks to all of you for your attention.